applications that I've done also have MCP servers set up that you can work with Claude. You can use them inside Visual Studio or VS Code, and that's a key thing when you're working with AI, to be able to integrate very easily, and the MCP servers really allow to do that. If anybody has any questions while I'm going through here, feel free to raise your hand. I'll try to make sure I'm watching for that. And Ed, if you see any questions or anything that I'm not stopping for, you can go ahead and, there's one question right there. Go ahead, Sachin.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm sorry, but I'm pretty new in this. Could you explain what is an MCP server?
Yeah, model context protocol. So like if you're using Claude or you're using ChatGPT does it a little bit differently. But a lot of, I can try to go into it a little bit later and show you, but it's kind of a way where you can, typically before you had an API that you would publish, and then another application would connect, to the API to be able to work with the data or the business logic that you're exposing. And the MCP server is kind of an extension of an API, but it allows, it has an endpoint, but it just uses a special protocol and a way for the clients to be able to communicate with it. So I'd say it's a little bit more robust than an API. An example, I'll show you one of the applications that I did with an MCP server. I can show you one right now, actually. So this is an application that I developed where I'm in Florida, and there's a lot of properties down here that have wetlands on them, and you can't disturb wetlands if you buy a piece of property. So if you're going to buy something, it's a good thing to be able to kind of do research and make sure that what you're buying doesn't have wetlands. An example is this property right here. Let me bring this up. It's got a high risk. I think it has like 95% wetlands on it. So if you would buy that, you wouldn't be able to really do any development. So this application, what it does is it takes an address, and then it goes and gets the parcel coordinates for it. So, like all properties in the United States are like assigned a parcel number, and this will go in and get the boundaries of the parcel, and then after it gets the boundaries of the parcel, it'll send a request to the U.S. Geological Survey's APIs for a soil report, and then what it'll do is it'll come back and it'll give you a determination, of what kind of soil is there. And depending on what kind of soil is there, it would either be wetlands likely or not. And like wetlands also has certain kinds of vegetation. So this is a kind of a clearance tool that people that are buying property, real estate agents, anybody dealing with property that wants to develop it can use to be able to figure out, is this a good one or is this a bad one? Here's an example of one that has a low probability of having a wetlands. You still would need to have a environmental engineer come and do a survey on the property, but this gives you a better idea of which ones you want to have them focus on. You wouldn't want to buy the one with a high chance and have them go there, because you're pretty much guaranteed you're not going to get a successful survey, and then you'll have a wetlands determination and you can't disturb that. So that's an example of the functionality, and I'll show you how the MCP server works with it, just for the configuration. Here is an example of how customers use the MCP server. So if you sign up for this application, then you'll get yourself your own API key. And then if you have Claude Desktop, you go into the Claude Desktop config file, the JSON file, you add this configuration line into it, and this is for the soil report. And then that's the URL that it hits, kind of like an endpoint. And then you put in your headers with the authorization and the bearer token for it. And that then what will happen is, I'm sorry, I don't have a demonstration of using the MCP server right now, but maybe in another session I can cover some more advanced concepts and using it. But the MCP server, basically, it exposes the functionality to do the soil report from Claude Desktop. So you could say, hey, do a soil report for this address, and then it would send the address and run the process and then return it back into the program that you're using. So it allows you to extend out your applications into other applications in a more robust and advanced way than just a typical API. Does that help answer your question, Sachin?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, yep, no problem. Yep, so let me go back to the presentation here. Yep, so that was that MCP server. It's not one of the ones that I had listed here. Yep, and then let's go. So I'm going to show you guys tonight real code, real agents, shipping products. I just showed you one right now. That one is hooked up with Stripe to be able to do payment processing. If you wanted to, and right now it's in test mode, it's still in the sandbox, but it'll be set up to be able to process payments and then allow people to buy those reports. Yep, and then the portfolio scope that I've done, and I can show you that in more detail in the CMDB Explorer that I showed you earlier, but I've done some stuff with cannabis analytics, IoT, and I've got a application called Turprint that goes and it processes the lab reports for dispensaries in Florida, and then from those lab reports, it allows you to sort and filter and match products and be able to have better understanding of the products that you're buying and what's in them. So if you're treating a symptom or you're using it medically, you can understand what works for you and what doesn't, and then from there, hopefully make a better decision to get something that helps you. For IoT energy, I have another application that actually, and all of these things I've done with AI and VS Code, but an example of the energy one is this one right here, which is called GenStart. So, with VS Code and with the more advanced models that you can use and the LLMs, you can do some really cool stuff. And, I was actually able to program an ESP32 chip with firmware, be able to flash it with code. And then, this is actually code that's running on an ESP32 chip. And then not only do we have a web server here, but then like with IoT stuff, these ESP32 chips, they have GPIO ports. So you can connect, like this is meant to be able to start and stop a portable generator. So any of the generators that you would see in Lowe's, Home Depot, that has a, automatic start where you can push a button and start it. This customers could buy this and then connect it to their generator, and then it would be able to start and stop it. And then this is also meant to be used with the solar energy system, where you can use what they call a two-wire start. And what it'll do is it'll send a start signal to the generator will start up, and then it'll actually send a stop signal, and then it'll stop the generator as well. And then this is also built to be able to send telemetry up to the cloud, so that customers can go and see their runtime. They have a way to see how many hours have been on it, so that you got to change the oil in these generators, so like every 100 hours. And also I've got some more advanced models. I think I can I can bring up the sales site here. Yeah, so I've got some more advanced model. This is the sales site for it, where you can go and purchase it. It's not, this one's still in the sandbox too, but I have some more advanced models that have sensors built into them, like a microphone sensor. And like if you're running a generator and it figures out the acoustic signal of what it normally sounds like, it sends that telemetry up to the cloud, and then it uses AI to be able to determine, oh, this doesn't sound normal. It's sounding a little differently. You might want to check on it. And this way it can be used for kind of doing preventative maintenance. So that's one of the products that I developed for IoT. I've got, let me go back here. I've got construction application that I built to help construction companies integrate their systems and actually be able to do some AI automation for automated quoting. I created a devs tool for VS Code. It's called the Chat Manager. One of the things I noticed when I was using GitHub Copilot initially is that it was kind of hard to go and search your chats and find information in your chat. So I developed a VS Code add-in and got that published up. You guys can download and use that. And that was something that I also used, the GitHub Copilot to do. I've got a digital signage app that I developed called Sign Loop. It's really cool. Basically allows you to take a display, like in a bar, restaurant, wherever that you want to show digital signage, and then you can program the presentation that you want to put on there with pictures and whatnot. And then we did a really cool AI add-on to it with the Raspberry Pi, where it was using a webcam to look at people looking at the signage. And then based on people looking at it, it would determine, oh, the person's looking at the sign, and it wouldn't change the picture that it was looking at, because I think we've all
Hey,
seen.
Jameson.
Yes.
Hey, sorry to cut you off there, but in the interest of time, because we don't have a lot of time, if we can just get into the, the training aspect and sort of like showcase some of these things so people have
Sure.
a
Okay.
view
No problem.
of what's going on. Thanks. Yeah.
Yep. No problem. All right. So yeah, but those are a couple of the different industries and verticals that I've developed in. Yeah, and Copilot is not just a coding assistant, in the AI software development organization. It becomes part of your delivery system. That's one of the things that supercharges it. So yeah, what we'll cover today is installing and configuring Copilot in VS Code, understand how Copilot works and where it shines, write better prompts for better suggestions. I'll show you some of those. Use custom instruction skills and agent modes. I'll show you some of those. We've already looked at some real world. Well, you've looked at some live demos of the applications I have developed, but I can show you an example of using Copilot to be able how I can show you what I use to produce that SOAR report. And then I'll cover some of the pitfalls and some of the hard-won tips and things that I've learned using it as well. So yeah, this is for developers of all levels. Whether you're a beginner or an expert, hopefully you can get something from this. Like I said, anybody has any questions, feel free to ask as I'm going along here. Hopefully you'll leave here with some configurations, patterns, a blueprint for tuning Copilot, and using it as a good development partner. Architects that are looking for governance, that's where the CMDB and some of the configurations that I've done to it, you'll see some of that stuff. And let's get right into, and like you were saying, the actual configuration. So, here's my VS Code installation, and the way the AI SDO works is it's a product that kind of is a repository, and then it kind of has all your configuration information in it. So like here's an AI organization folder, and I have a configuration project, and in that configuration project is where I have the AI SDO, which allows me to get a lot of these results. And a big part of the AI SDO is the CMDB schema, which we have right here. So, you can kind of extend this, and, you could build your own CMDB if you wanted to, but it has all of the fields that you want to track. And, what I was aiming for here is being able to replicate something like Orbis iServer or, ServiceNow or any of those platforms that are, repository configuration, information for your applications. That's what I was trying to be able to let, people that maybe don't have access to iServer or those enterprise tools to be able to produce results using, very similar configuration. So this has got all
Hey,
the
Jameson,
different. Yep.
can you zoom in a bit? I think guys are saying
Sure.
they can't see.
Yeah, let me see here. What is the Zoom key for Visual Studio? I don't know. What's the best way to I'm trying to hold down control. What is it?
Control plus, command plus, depending on what you're using.
Sorry, I didn't totally understand that.
I think you can use Control plus.
Control plus, okay.
Plus.
Yeah, there we go. Is that better?
Mm-hmm.
I was trying to do control mouse wheel, and sometimes that works in some applications. Can you guys see better now?
Yep.
Yes? No?
Yep, they're good.
That's better? Okay, good. All right, yeah. Well, let me go kind of back up here a little bit then if you weren't able to see it. So on the left-hand side, you've got the repository that I've opened, which is the Sydney config one. And then I have the AI SDO installed there, and that's this folder right here. In the AI organization, we've got some configuration stuff there, some different templates, and then we've got an enterprise folder here, which has got some of the enterprise configurations. And what I was talking about is the CMDB. So we have a whole CMDB folder in here. You've got a bunch of, I've got the schema that we were just looking at right here is over here on the left. So this is I think this is which one is the most current one? Yeah, so this is the 2.6 version. So the one I was showing you before is a little bit older version of it. But the CMDB, like I said, it kind of it's the same thing as like an Orbis iServer or ServiceNow CMDB or some other enterprise tool that you're using to keep track of the characteristics of your applications. And I wanted to be able to give development teams that maybe don't have that capability to be able to do this type of stuff. So what this does is it kind of defines all of the characteristics of the applications that I have, and then that's where we're looking at the CMDB Explorer. So the different fields that I've got defined in the CMDB, this is kind of just a visual interface to look at it. This is pulling directly from the configuration management database. And, so here's the schema. And then what happens is with the schema, then we go down and we look at different products that have been created. And then here's a list of all the different products that match over to what we were just looking at in the web interface, because it's not that much fun to look through the folders and try to figure everything out about it. So what happens is I've configured VS Code to use these tools and to use them when I'm doing new stuff. And then it's also kind of a self-enhancing system where, if I wanted to add a pattern or a practice or a way or a method or a way to do something in a consistent and reliable way, I'd update the CMDB and some of the configuration files. And then when I go in and use the chat over here, like on the chat window, it would allow me to go in and produce the results a lot faster and a lot better. And like, here's an example of a Copilot chat. And this is literally what I said. So can you guys see this okay?
I think you're gonna have to zoom out a little bit then.
Zoom out, okay.
Oh, zoom in, sorry. Zoom in. Sorry.
Better. Zoom out. You got to put the glasses on, right? Can you see better? Okay. So, literally, this is, if you configure VS Code right, you can not have to say so many words to get it done. And also, I'll say that, there's different models you can use. Right now, I'm only got a couple of basic ones loaded. But the ones that I've used primarily to do all of this have been the Claude Opus models, and they're a little more expensive if you're paying to use them. But what I've found is that if you use a more advanced model, it can actually understand more and get more done. It gets less confused. You have less hallucination, and it's also able to understand the CMDB and the configuration that has been that I've done for VS Code, and be able to take that. So, and then here's an example of what I told it. Please create a documentation file that takes a CMDB schema. It makes it look pretty for humans to read and explore, either an HTML file with a transform file or the YAML or whatever. And, I said to do that, and then it goes through and it kind of goes and figures all of that stuff out. It works through it. And one of the key things that I've configured VS Code for is that there's a setting that you can tell it how many instructions to execute before it stops and asks you everything okay. And what I found is that, if you don't have a lot of configuration, if you don't have the CMDB and you don't have it configured very well, it kind of gets confused and doesn't know what to do. And you do need to really stop at every 5 to 10 or 20 instructions to keep it on track. But if you configure it good enough, I've got mine set up literally to do 200 instructions before it asks me for anything. I've been very impressed with how much it can produce and what it can do. And here's an example of, what it did to be able to produce what we were just looking at. So, not a whole lot. Each one of these are tokens. Every time it goes through one of these things, we're using some tokens. And there's a cost to doing all this. But here it got it running. It's like, okay, your server's running, go take a look at it. And then, I was saying, hey, can we add a description column? I just said, hey, can we make a couple of these changes to it? And then it goes in and does that. And I was like, allow me to resize and reorder columns. And these are things that you could also define in your AISDO or your configuration of VS Code. You could tell it, okay, every time you do a table, do it this way. Always make sure that it's resizable and reorderable in the columns. And I didn't have that designed in, but that's something that you could do if you were doing a lot of work. It was table related. You could enhance it to your instructions for how to do the tables the way you want. But this is what I did. And then here I use Claude Sonnet 4.6 to do this. And I think I started out with, where did it go? Let me see here. Yeah, so I did all this with Claude Sonnet because it wasn't too super complicated. All I was telling it to do was, hey, we've got a schema, and then I want you to take that schema and the data files that match that schema, and then create a web interface to it. And then that's where it created this for me. So this, I mean, didn't take that long to do. And then I think in terms of the value that it produced, you know, it made it a lot more clear about what, you know, what exactly do we have in here. And, you know, like I said before, I had 46 products and now I'm up to 86 products. So, yep. And so each of the products over here has their own file or own, you know, folder. And then some of the other stuff that I was able to do with it that was really cool. Let me see if I can find one that has, so, and this is another thing that I had configured it with the AI SDO, is that I told it to start, you know, creating systems development lifecycle files. So here it'll go in and I'll give it the application overview of what I want it to do. And then using the right models, it's really able to go in and figure out like, okay, what is a, you know, business requirements document, has all of that. It'll write up all that stuff. So this is really great, you know, if you've got to have other stakeholders in the enterprise or organization you're working with, you know, you can circulate these to the stakeholders, get input, use that to drive your solution design. You know, we've got your solution architecture, solution design here. And then, you know, my thing was I wanted to be able to produce stuff that was, you know, enterprise quality using this kind of simple free tool for VS Code and using Copilot. So you can see here it's created all of these different SDLC documents, and this was kind of based on the schema that I told it, you know, to create these different types of documents, and then it can go in there and it does all of that and it creates that stuff for you, which, you know, I think it helps a lot to be able to have the documentation. So it helps a lot with doing the documentation. Is that better in terms of going into some of the usage and details?
Yep, absolutely.
Good. Okay, good. Yep. So, you know, part one, installation, VS Code, Visual Studio. It's relatively simple. You know, go to your extensions, find the GitHub Copilot chat one, and let me just see here. Okay. Take a look at it. Yep. And then here we go. GitHub Copilot. Oh, we've got to use the GitHub Copilot chat one. So they've already deprecated that old one. But yeah, here it is. And then you can install it. And, you know, let's see here. Where are the settings? So these are the settings that I was talking about for it. Let me go down to where I was telling you about the instructions and the number of instructions that you can have it execute. It's got a lot of, they've enhanced this quite a bit, you know, since it came out. They added a lot of cool new features. I remember when I was using it a couple months ago, a lot of times the models were giving me too many red syntax errors. And, you know, the Copilot chat would kind of get confused about what the actual syntax was for PowerShell and how to execute things. And it would try to use curl instead of invoke web request, and then it would get an error. And then, you know, I was talking with Ed, I was like, well, geez, I mean, all these errors are costing me money. Hopefully they'll get this figured out soon. And they did. They got it figured out and got it better so that, you know, you weren't spending as much time watching, you know, red syntax errors that it was executing and causing issues. I'm trying to go down and find the number of instructions setting. Let me see here. But that's one of the, yeah, let's see here. Let me see here. Well, maybe they might have moved it somewhere else. I haven't updated mine in a while, but there's a setting here that tells you that you can tell it how many instructions to execute before it comes back to you and asks you for guidance or making sure it's okay. And I mean, originally when I started out with it, I forget what the default is, but it was a very low number. And then as I got this more mature with using the tool, then I was able to bump up how many instructions I would let it go through. And, you know, you can see in this chat window right here, you know, it kind of would usually would get to a point and it would complete what I wanted it to do. And then it would be like, okay, I did what you wanted, you know, take a look at it. And, that's kind of what I wanted to do. It's kind of like having it makes you kind of like the software development manager, and Copilot is kind of, the developer. Oops, I'm sorry. I guess nobody told me I moved the webcam and you weren't looking at me directly. If you are looking at me, I don't know. But yeah, it kind of turned it into a real engineer pretty much. Oops, sorry, got my cable is stuck here. Hold on. Oh, there we go. This one. Okay, yeah, I'm sorry, I don't want it to keep moving. Oh, there we go. The simple things can sometimes be hard. There, I think that should be good. Yeah, so that was an example of using the chat and telling it to do what I wanted it to do. And, these are using the AI SDO, the AI Software Development Organization configuration to be able to produce those results. Yeah, and then I don't know where that number was, yeah, but that's a key thing. And then how many instructions you want to execute before it comes back to you, because every one of those instructions is going to burn tokens. And, if you're burning tokens doing the wrong thing, every one of these instructions costs something. And this kind of helps you, I think, be the most productive with it and get the most bang for the buck. All right. But so install GitHub Copilot Chat, sign in with GitHub. And then start typing. And what I'm using right now, in terms of this version, this is the free version. I did all this other stuff using the advanced version, or using some of the more advanced models that they have. I've found that for me, I liked using the Claude models, Claude Opus, Claude Sonnet, and Claude Haiku. But I had also good results using the GPT models, using the Grok models. They've all worked kind of well, but I think from my perspective, I thought the ones from Anthropic and Claude kind of worked the best for what I was trying to do. Where it kind of produced it kind of just got it, and it knew what I was saying, and it was able to produce what I wanted pretty easily. But yeah, you sign into your GitHub account, like down here, where is that? Yep, so there's your GitHub account. Sign into GitHub, and then once you sign into GitHub, and you get there's a free version of GitHub Copilot Chat, and then you can also upgrade to the Pro version, which gives you more models that you can work with. And I'd like to cover those maybe in another session. But that being said, I've used the advanced models to kind of produce all this stuff, but it's been, I think, really helpful. I showed you guys earlier in the presentation. Let me go back to, how many, I did all of those repositories, all these contributions, 6,000 contributions with it. And, you can also tell it how you want it to check stuff in, when you want it to check it in, whether you want to do feature branches, which is a recommended best practice, but you can, configure it however you want it to work for your own needs or your enterprise's needs. But yeah, so once you install it, and you open up the chat window over here, and you have a new chat, and you can tell it to do what you want. And it kind of gets going. You've got some different settings over here. I'm using auto model is where it's supposed to be able to pick, what the best model is for whatever you're trying to do. And I think that works okay in some situations. But most of the time, like I said, I was using the Claude Opus. It was like 4.6, and now they're up to 4.7. I've used these other ones as well, and I think they're good for kind of simple things. Like if it's not a complicated thing you're asking it to do, usually the less expensive models and less sophisticated ones can do that. But like I said, I think the more advanced models, they can kind of understand more. It's more of like a junior developer versus a senior developer type of thing. It seems to have more experience, more under the belt, and you have to say less words to have it understand what you want it to do. Yep. So the three surfaces of Copilot, you've got the inline suggestions. So, line by line coding, that's one way you can use it. So actually in your code, like over here, you've got, there should be a Copilot thing here to be able to have it. Oh, I think, is that it right there? Yeah, there's context menus that are built into it. You've got the chat panel that we were looking at before, and then a lot of times in the code there will be inline chat where you can tell it, to change something or look at a line of code. I do most of my work through the chat panel. Occasionally, I don't really look at the actual lines of code as much. What I've done is I've had it build analysis tools to analyze the code, and you can kind of see that over here in the CMDB. If you open these up, there's maturity scorecards. So what you can do is you can define, what your maturity criteria is, and after you've defined that, then you can kind of tell it to go in there and analyze all of your code for maturity. And let me see here, I've got some that are more mature than others. Like this one, in terms of the maturity scorecard, is at 2, 3 in this area: security, documentation, testing, observability, CI/CD, and you can go in and customize what that criteria is and how it judges that. But I was trying to use like the CMMI capability maturity model, and I think TOGAF were the 2 areas that I was using for analyzing maturity of the applications. And you can define that and then have it go in there and actually do the analysis for you. Yep, so the chat panel is where it stops being autocomplete and starts acting like an engineer. And that's what I was just showing you guys earlier. Over, these are some of the different, like here's that Solar report development. Let me zoom in so you guys can see that better. But yeah, the Solar report development, this is what I said to it. Can you figure out a way to do this as a tool? We enter an address and get the Solar report back. And also the nice thing I found about the Copilot is if you're fat fingering and you're typing stuff wrong, it figures it out. I mean, I use different keyboards and whatnot, and I'll type things wrong, and it knows what you're saying. It's not like, what did you mean? It usually can figure it out, which I thought was pretty cool. But here's what I kind of asked it to do. It said, do that. And then it goes in and analyzes the USDA web soil survey. It comes up with a strategy, comes up with a plan, figures out how to do it. And then it comes up with the architecture that are based on the standards that I've defined in the CMDB and the AISDO. It creates a new product code for it. I've already got an existing product called Solar, and then, container app API behind API manager with a single endpoint. And then it defines that, and it goes through and, it went through, this is all the thinking that it did. Let me zoom out a little bit here. But yeah, and then it gives you an effort estimate and to get a proof of concept, and then a full product. And, sometimes it'll be like, oh, it'll take a week or 2 to do it. And then it's like, just get it all done now, and it'll keep working on it. And that's where you got to have those 200 instructions to be able to have it just get through it. It'd be nice if they had timestamps in here so you could see how, long it took to go from, one step to the next. But yeah, here's an example. This one was a little more work than the CMDB Explorer, partly because it was a little more complicated. We're going in and we're doing a web interface. We're putting an address in. Then I had to have it go and look up parcels and get the GeoJSON. And then after it looked up the parcel, then it would have to go to the USGS and be able to send the API request there, then bring it back. And then here's kind of the flow that it came through, how it would do what I was just talking about. And it came up with this design. And then what will happen is the way I have it configured is it'll do the design and be like, hey, this is according to your standards. This is how I'm going to do it. And then it's like, okay, yeah, go ahead and do it. And then if it needs anything like credentials or excuse me, configurations. Typically, the practice that I've used is to store a lot of the stuff that you need for authentication in a key vault, and it uses that to be able to authenticate to whatever endpoints you're using or for whatever sensitive configuration information you need. But it handles that design. I told it to use key vault. One of the things that you could do with it is you could say, I don't want to use key vault, I want to use the HashiVault. If you wanted to be able to develop on Google or on cross-platform. Another thing that I've done with this is, I'm using Bicep mostly to do all the stuff because I'm in Azure. But you could also configure it to use Terraform if you wanted to, so that you could have, a multi-cloud type of a strategy. But yeah, here's all of the chat and all of the, it does a lot of analysis and a lot of thinking, and then, it'll come back to you and ask questions, and then it'll get through, and then this is, and then this is where it created the actual application for me. So, and I think to get a proof of concept, I mean, it was like a day, and then kind of refining it more takes a little bit more time. But if you define stuff up front, you can have it get more done faster. It's all based on usually how good your configuration is. Yep. So, and we kind of talked about that. It can kind of predict the tokens based on your contact. It's not magically searching everything. The context that you're working with comes from your open files, nearby files, recent edits, prompts, and instruction files. And I can, with some of the context is like from the CMDB. So if we look over here, some of the configurations for Copilot are all over here. On the left side, if you look at, we've got agents. One of the things that I've used that was a big accelerator for me, I'll show you guys. There's a repository called Awesome Copilot. This is pretty much free. You can integrate all of these artifacts and tools into your VS Code, and these are things that I've used as well. It's got the agents that I'm using. They've kind of changed them and made them, enhanced them a little bit. I haven't updated mine in a little while, but this is all specialized agents that go in and can handle all different types of special problems. If you've got a specific language you're working in, or specific context, you can find something. Here's a Java MCP expert agent. So if you were a Java environment and you wanted to do an MCP server, then what you would do is you could use this agent, and it's got a lot of expertise. Like if we look at the file here, tells you what it is, what it does. It's really cool because it's like you can, as opposed to putting a job rec out for somebody that you want to join the team that has certain skills, now it's kind of like, you can go find the agent that has those skills built in and be able to produce, what you would typically, I think before, need to maybe hire another team member to do. And this is constantly evolving and developing. I mean, the most recent one, this one was last month. One of the ones that I've used is, I don't know if this is in here, there's an Azure Principal Architect. So this one right here is one that I've used a lot. So if you're working in Azure, this is one that I've used extensively. And also, where is the other one? But there's a strategic planning one that's really good for kind of coming up with a high-level plan. Let me see here. Is this the one? Yeah. Strategic Planning and Architecture Assistant. This I've found to be a very good one, because what I'll do is I'll go into it and say, hey, I want to build this app, and I'll use this agent, and then it'll really do detailed analysis and design from a strategic perspective and architecture, and it'll kind of design everything out. And then from there, you can go and have it used, like there's a principal software engineer. There's some other agents that are built into this. I mean, you can create your own agents. But let's see here, the principal software engineer is another one that I've used. Where's that one? Oh, this one here. So the principal software engineer, so you can switch from architecture over to software engineering, and then the software engineer uses the architecture and the designs that you created with the other agent. And then, I found it to be able to produce pretty high level code. Now, the thing is, this principal software engineer, it doesn't specifically say a language. It doesn't, specifically say certain things about how it's going to do it. That's where if you have the CMDB and you've got configurations set up for it to reference, then you have your patterns and practices there. And my thing is, I don't really tell it as much the language to use as much as the architecture to use to do stuff. So typically most of my stuff is done as a container app, and then you can deploy the container apps. Those are observable, scalable. They're pretty low cost because you could have them scale down to 0. That works pretty good for a development environment if you don't want to have high costs. And that's another thing that I've done is I've built like a cost analysis agent where it goes in and it figures out how to do the lowest cost type of a design, so you can get like an MVP or a proof of concept done pretty easily. And then, you don't need to spend a lot of money, and you can use that to show people and get the buy-in from the stakeholders, and then move it through the process, over to a production app. but yeah, so that covers the instruction files and, you know, like anything else with the systems IO model, IPO model, garbage in, garbage out. You know, so the better inputs you're giving it in the context, usually the higher quality of the results that it'll produce. Yeah, the better context, I think, is a key thing. Because when I started out, I was trying to figure out ways to do this, and one of my approaches was to use like Python packages. It seemed to like using Python a lot, and I was like, oh, let me do a Sydney config, you know, package, and that, you know, then every application had to install it, and it really wasn't doing good governance of everything else. And then I was like, okay, let me try to leverage Copilot a little bit better, and, you know, use it the way it's designed. And that's where I started having the CMDB and having my instruction files that I use, you know, tell it to actually use the CMDB. Let me see if I can find one of those like instructions. So another example of something, you know, that's pretty cool is I did a DNS agent, you know, where I have my own DNS from the registrars. I've got the API keys for like Ionos and GoDaddy stored in a key vault. And then what I can do is, you know, it can go in and use that to go out and create the DNS entries for, you know, any applications that you're developing. So that's one example of custom instructions that you can use. You can tell it, you know, do this for managing DNS, and it makes it pretty simple. You just say, hey, make this URL for that app, and then it knows basically how to go and do that. Another thing that I did is Google and Microsoft Clarity. I don't know where that one is in here, but typically you want to have usage tracking of your apps. You want to use Google Analytics and Microsoft Clarity, and you know, I have another agent which will go in, it'll create the Google Analytics property using a Google service account. And after it does that, it'll actually, it got a little more advanced recently where Clarity didn't have an API, and it's so I'd have to log into Clarity and then link the two accounts, and then it got smarter and it started using Playwright to open up Clarity and actually, you know, pretending I was a user and going and logging into Clarity and doing that. So that was kind of impressive to me where it kind of figured that out and was able to do that. So yeah, better the context and the better your configuration is of it, usually the better results you're going to get. And here's an example, you know, where Copilot, you know, shines and where it can really amplify your productivity. You know, I found it as a kind of a force multiplier. You know, I showed you like for documentation, your gain of 4 to 8 times. You know, look at the files I was showing earlier for the SDLC. And having that ability to produce that type of documentation, I consider that to be very high quality documentation, not user documentation, but documentation for the architects, for the engineers, for the stakeholders, for the different people involved in the SDLC. Of course, it can produce user documentation as well. But you know, your systems development, lifecycle documentation, anything else that you want, you know, it can do. And then one of the other things, I don't know if anybody saw that up here, but it has an ability. I built an architecture review board into it. So I defined patterns and practices and how I wanted to do stuff. And there's a way that if the planning, the strategic plan is like, well, we need to do it this way, but that doesn't line up with our architectural guidance, then what it'll actually do is it'll try to create an ARB, you know, architecture review board document so that you can have, you know, an architecture review for approving architectural changes that you want. So that was a cool thing where you're getting a lot of control, you know, over how you're doing things and a lot of maturity and your ability to kind of produce what you want quickly and reliably, you know, which is one of the big indicators of maturity is how well can you do what you're planning to do. And this is a big multiplier. Go ahead.
Can you show like a little bit of detail on what that looks like? You're showing these documents, and I'm seeing YAML, I'm seeing Markdown.
Mm-hmm.
What are you putting in the YAML? What are you putting in the Markdown? How does it work with Copilot? How is Copilot picking it up? Are you selecting those files when you prompt it? Like, how is it actually, how are you constructing the value from these documents that we're seeing?
So like one of the examples, this is the same kind of pattern in practice. Like if we were looking at the enterprise and we were looking at the CMDB, so the CMDB has a schema here, that defines what we're tracking. And this is kind of the pattern that you use, is that you define a configuration and then you tell the instructions to use the configuration. And then what will happen here is, like with the CMDB schema, if I create a new product, what it'll do is it'll create a product YAML with all of these fields in it, but it'll actually make that product YAML have the specific fields for that product based on whatever that's doing. So up here is kind of the high-level configuration of how the system is configured, and then when the agents are running, it's kind of the instructions that I have up here are telling it to do this and to reference that, and then it goes and reference that, and then from there it goes and it'll go in and create the artifacts that are actually part of the product itself. So like each of these products, they all have a product YAML, and some of them have more than that. But yeah, each one of these are a product, and then what's happening is that CMDB Explorer that I showed you, that's actually reading from those values and those fields and each one of those product YAMLs. So I needed to do a little better job with some of these and cleaning them up and improving the consistency of them. Some of these products are, they're in different life cycles or different stages. Like I've got a lot of stuff in development here, right? But yeah, it's kind of like the high-level configuration, your enterprise architecture guidance that you have. You define that, and then after you define that, you tell the Copilot instructions, like over here that we were looking at in the GitHub folder. Let's see here. Yeah, in
So
GitHub.
can you show an example of quickly doing one of those, of creating a configuration, let's say to create a basic website or something like that? What kind of document would you create, and what would you put into the actual prompt? That's because it's not clear from there's a lot of documents you're showing here, so it's not, at least it's not clear to me how much of this is a setup that's specific to what you're doing versus a setup that if I wanted to create something very simple, do I need to have a YAML file, a markdown file, or anything? How does that work? How is it organized within this tool?
Let me see here. Let's see. If I think I have something. See here if I've got.
Could you?
This one
could
here.
you just create a new? Can we open a new Visual Studio and just go through setting up something quickly to demonstrate how you would get to this point? You're very small. I don't know if this might be too much, but a very small sample just to illustrate for everyone. Like, okay, you're starting from scratch. Okay, we want to create a website for a restaurant or something like that.
Yep.
How do we do that? From an empty folder with Visual Studio Code. Okay.
I think if somebody wanted to do that and they wanted to produce something, what I would recommend doing to get started, the AI SDO is like a full product that I've developed. You could get that product and you could actually install that and use that. If you didn't want to do that, what I would recommend doing is to go and get started with the Awesome Copilot and download that Awesome Copilot repository, and then configure whatever project you're working in your folder. There's a GitHub folder right here, and under the GitHub folder you can load the agents in that you want to use. There's actually a agent that you can use to actually write some of your prompts and some of those custom instructions. So there's one called Prompt Builder. There's one that's Prompt Engineer and Prompt Builder. The Prompt Builder, you can actually say, okay, this is what I use to be able. So if you wanted to quickly do a website, you could download Awesome Copilot, load all these agents in, and then what happens is you do a new chat window. Let me move this into a new window. And then in here, you've got access. So here's all the agents that you have. So there's a default agent setting. There's an ask setting and there's a plan. This is kind of what comes out of the box with Copilot. But if you could download Awesome Copilot and you load up these different agents, then you'll see all of these ones show up. And it'll also, I've created some custom ones in here, the Sydney Google agent, the DNS agent. But what you could do is go to the prompt builder. And right now I'm not using the advanced models, so I can't vouch for the effectiveness, but I'll bring it up and I'll say that's under prompt builder, create a prompt to do, what would be a good thing? Websites or Wix? I mean, I don't think Wix you can actually program, right? What would be a good one? Anybody have any ideas?
Like maybe a basic web page for a restaurant, something like that.
Okay, to do basic web pages for businesses. Okay, there you go. So now I'll tell it to do that. And right now I'm not working with the Copilot Pro, so there's a little bit more limitations. I've got a little issue with my configuration that I got to work out. But this might run into some limits. There's quota limits and there's usage limits that get in there where you have, they do throttling. So if you send too many instructions, you've got a quota, and then what it'll say is, okay, your quota will reset, later today at 5 o'clock, or you've used your weekly quota already. But here's an example. So I'm saying create a prompt to do basic web pages for businesses. I'm using prompt builder down here. So I've downloaded Awesome Copilot. I've loaded these different agents up. Is there a question? Ed?
Well, I got two questions. How much does the Copilot Pro cost? And that's one question. And then the other question is, like, if you hit a quota limit, what does that mean? Does that mean that Copilot just stops talking to you, or does he start responding with a lower grade model, like a model that has fewer resources?
Good question. So the Copilot Pro, I believe, is like $39 a month. And when you sign up for Copilot Pro, it used to include some basic models. I don't know if you guys were following Ed on LinkedIn, but Ed, Ed Momeka, you posted something about how they've moved now to, I think, paid for everything. But what happens is you sign up for Copilot Pro. That gives you advanced access to more models than what the basic free version does. So that gives you one upgrade right there. And then after you get access to those other models, each one of those has a different cost. If you see over here, there's 1x, 1x, 1x. It's kind of like it uses, 1 times the multiplier for tokens. Some of the more like the Claude Opus was actually at one point it was 11 times, and now I think currently it's 7 times. And then I think Sonnet is 1 times, but what happens is that affects how many tokens you're using for each request, for each one of these steps that it goes through. And then when you hit your quota, it'll typically, what it does now is it'll give you a message and say, your quote, you've used your usage quota, and it resets, it'll either say like later today or tomorrow. And that's typically just for the model that you're using. So if I was using the Claude Opus 4.7 model and it told me, okay, you hit your quota, some of your options are you can go and use like another Claude model, the Haiku or Sonnet. And then depending on the type of work that you're doing, if you've already done I use the Opus model mostly for the high level understanding and like a very senior developer type of work. But if you were doing stuff that you might give to a junior developer or an intern, you could use, I think, the Haiku model. Sonnet's a little more advanced than that. And there's also some documentation I think GitHub has produced about which models work best for which types of problems that you're solving. So there is some, specialization between the different models from the different vendors about what they do best or what they work best on. But I've found, like Ed, I've made a comment into your LinkedIn when they were talking about going to, not including any quota for the Copilot Pro. My finding is that your indirect cost of using a lower cost model ends up being higher than your direct cost of using a higher level model. And what that means is if you use an advanced model, it may cost more upfront, but the results that you'll get quickly are much higher quality. And if you use a lower quality model, from what I've seen, what will happen is it'll take you longer time and more iterations to be able to get to your desired goal. So your initial cost might be less, but you may end up actually using more to get to that point you wanted to. That's kind of what I've seen, and that might change because this is certainly evolving and developing very fast. But that's a key thing that I've kind of found with it. If you use a more expensive model, I've found it if I wanted to incorporate all that context that I showed earlier with the AISDO and the CMDB and all that, the lower cost models seem to have a harder time using that. So, you could give it pretty simple instruction, and usually it can handle that. But the more expensive ones I've found, I think they're lower cost. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's kind of like, I guess, bringing a very senior person in to solve a problem, which will probably do it of a higher quality quicker than, somebody who's, junior and still learning some of the stuff. And, it might take them a couple iterations to get through it. But the junior developers, it definitely plays their part, and they can, do certain things very well. Usually it's just not advanced stuff. So if you scope what it's doing well and you have it very clear what you want it to do and it's well laid out, I think it can do it pretty well. But if you needed to do more contextual awareness and more, I guess, like deep thinking, the more advanced models seem to be better. Okay, so all right, we asked it to create a prompt to create a business website. This is all of the thinking that it went through to go through all of the stuff that it, has figured it needed to be able to include into it. I'm using, like I said, the prompt builder agent, which is part of the awesome Copilot. And then I am using the Claude Haiku model, which is part of the free version to do this. And you can see it's figured out, okay, for our contact form, this is how I would do that. This is how I would configure it. It may be using some of my configuration stuff that I have in AISDO, because I'd have to open up a new repository, and that would totally be starting from scratch. And I'm not sure exactly how that would work compared to what we have right here, because that doesn't really tell you, okay, I'm using all of these instructions, at least not very clearly, to produce what I did. But it went through all of this thinking, went through the prompt builder validation complete. Your basic business website prompt is ready for use. The prompt tester validation confirms, okay, 0 issues, blah, blah, blah. And then, and here you go. So using this prompt, now I don't know if it, let's see, I don't know if it already added it to my list of prompts. Is it in there? Not yet. So I think I would need, let me see where it put it. But here's it saying, how you would use it. So how to use this prompt for designers and developers using this basic business website prompt, let's just see if it does that. So let's try that. All right. So we'll go to the regular agent, the default agent, and it's already got, if you notice here, it has added to the contacts the prompt builder agent. Well, that's the one that we have open right now. So what we want to do is open the business website one. Here it is. And now that we have that open, let's see here. Let me see if I go back to the Copilot. There we go. So right now we've got I'll open this up into a new window, but here we actually have the basic business website prompt opened up, and that's the current file context, okay? So we created a prompt, and then we opened the prompt up in VS Code, and then whatever file that you have open in VS Code, when you do a new chat window, it's going to add that to your context. So right here, we've got the basic business website prompt.md. And now we're going to go and say, all right, using the basic business website prompt, create a website for, let's just say, a construction company, and then including, including like homepage, reference page, blog page, and the typing still fat fingering here, and then saying apply mobile first design, and I'm not going to tell it the framework. I'm going to let it kind of decide what framework to use. A lot of times what it'll do is it'll use a static web app, and it'll figure out, whatever the, best language is to use to do it. I've kind of let it kind of figure out how it wants to do it. I haven't really gone in and changed the code. I have it doing all the code, but let's see here now what happens. So we created a prompt now, and now we should be using the prompt to be able to go and actually create something. Found the prompt file. Now it should have already had it because we've got it opened up and you can see it right there. And then here it's going. So it's actually going, and it's going to build a basic business website. Homepage, contact page. Yep. It's creating all the different files that it needs for it. And if you had a framework or some type of a way that you wanted to do it, you could tell it. I took that out. I just said, apply mobile first design. I don't know what percentage of users are on mobile devices now. I know it seems like it's only going up. Looks like it's using TypeScript, TSX pages, right? CSS, next.config. So, yep, .js. Those are the frameworks it's using. And any of these files that it creates, you can go and open them up. Well, it's actually creating them. Sometimes it gives you an issue as it's creating them, and sometimes you can't open them until it's actually done. It'll tell you everything it created in the end. But yeah, now it's going through and creating a basic website. And then if you have, like, for example, an Azure subscription, I'll show you how you would actually do that. So let's just see here, go into terminal, do a new terminal window. Come on. To do AZ login. And this is another thing you've got to make sure you've got the Azure, Azure different modules to be able to work with Azure installed on your local machine. That's part of your developer workstation config, but I'll log in with that account. There we go. It's got the subscription, you can have different subscriptions in your account. So now I'm actually logged into Azure, right? And this website builder, if it wanted to go and deploy the app, it actually has a place to be able to deploy it. It looks like it's going to be I think a static web app, probably is how it'll do it. But yep, it's going through, creating those different files. And the other thing I've noticed is that you do want to have usually a developer's workstation. And let's take a look at that. That's another thing. So, I've got how many cores? I've got 16 cores. I've got, I think I've got 32 gigs of memory. I've got a SSD, drive. This is I think a pretty good class developer workstation. It actually has an MPU, built into it. It's AMD Ryzen 7. And I've actually been able to have Copilot write code that tests the MPU. I did that with that sign loop thing for the digital signage, and it can do inference processing, and it was able to actually leverage that. And I actually wrote code that I was able to get the MPU to go up to like 100%. It actually came up with a test, and then it was cool because what happened was there was a bug, I think, in the AMD software, the driver for the MPU, and then it kind of had me do a bug report. Somebody else had the issue, and then we were able to figure out a workaround to it. But right here, you can look, it's, what I've done in the past is you can actually have like 6 of these running at one time. So if you really wanted to get heavy duty, you can have 4 or 5, 6 different chat windows open doing different things at one time. And that's where you can really push your CPU up to 100%. So if you don't have a good developer's workstation, then you might have issues of performance of it being able to do this stuff very quickly. So that's something that, you should definitely keep in mind. I think the one that I was working on before only had like 4 cores or 8, and it just wasn't able to keep up. And then what I did is I actually was using for a period of time an Azure Virtual Desktop, and that was an improvement over the local machine that I had. And then I was like, well, I really want to get 16 cores, and I wanted to get more, and that's kind of expensive up on the Azure Virtual Desktop. So it became more cost-effective to move to a local development workstation. But you can do all of this stuff on a virtual desktop. I did that. A lot of these things I did that up until February, I think, where I was using an AVD. Yep, let's see here. So it's going through and creating all these files. What is creating Jamie? Oh, it's creating the folder, I guess. Creating files. Is this what you were looking for, Ed, in terms of going through and doing this?
This looks great.
What's that?
Yes.
Great. All right. So it's going through, what is it, project summary? Yeah, so we should be able to open up the created file. So yep, this is what it created. It gives you a kind of a quick start. Where did that go? Come on now. Oh, there it is. Quick start. Yeah, so here we go. So, and then it actually creates, Build Pro construction website, quick start guide, project created successfully, getting started in 3 steps, install dependencies. I'm pretty sure we have everything that's needed, run dev server, and then open it up in your browser. And I think it's going to do all that stuff for us. Gives you some project structure at a glance, what pages it did, the components, your mobile first design features, what we asked it to do, performance stuff, complete pages included, home, contact, references, blog, which I asked it to do, quick customization checklist. So it tells you what you need to update: company name, phone, email, address, colors. You could also feed that in from the beginning if you knew all that. Accessibility verified, SEO optimized, component breakdown. This is all the stuff that it created here: reference page, blog page, build and deploy. I think it did a lot of stuff pretty quickly. Now here's another thing with the email configuration. If you're using Azure, there's Azure communication services that you can use. You can also use SendGrid or whatever other email provider you have. But if you use I've used some of the agents to actually configure Azure. So the Azure Principal Architect, you can actually tell it to go in and configure and provision resources in Azure. So it can configure an Azure Communication Services instance for you, set it up, actually go through and do the DNS configuration for your domain name with a sender policy framework and the, DKIM, so they can handle all that so that your emails going out come from your domain name, and it passes all of the validation checks for, making sure your email is legitimate. Yep, so it's telling you, yeah, here's the ways you can set up your email. You can use SendGrid if you need to. You can use AWS. Here's your next steps, how to get it working, helpful resources, pro tips, troubleshooting. It created all of this stuff. Support for issues or questions. Check the README file, and it's your professional construction website is ready. Happy building. So let's just see if did it finish everything over here in the actual chat window. Okay, and here we go. So this is exactly what I was talking about with the quota. See where it says that? And today is the 13th, so I've used 72% of my session rate limit. So you've seen what we actually produced something using the free version, and like it says, it'll reset at 11:55 p.m. So let's just see here. Quick start. Let's just do this. So if you click this button here, it'll actually go and install everything. Let's see here. Yeah. Now let's see here if it actually loaded it up. Link. All right, so it had a little bit of an issue. And then here's an example of, you can go in and say, all right, so I'll copy those errors, go over here and say, and I'll say fix these errors, literally. Hopefully we can do that within our quota limit. I think we can, because I did exactly what it told me to do. And this might be an example of using a less sophisticated model right here, where the more sophisticated ones will give you instructions that work more reliably. Missing script dev, npm error, blah, blah, blah. It's trying to figure out, okay, what do we need to do? Oh, okay, I think it might have been in the wrong folder. So the instructions here just said to CD construction website. So I think the issue is that I wasn't in the right folder. I was in another folder for a PLC that I developed for a fraternity brother of mine that has some casino software that he sells to casinos for helping user tracking, user engagement. It uses AI to analyze it. It does outbound marketing stuff. They link it with like gifting, so they can figure out who to gift what, for the high rollers and the players. But I think what the problem is, I can figure this out right here, is that we're not in the construction website directory. So if I go back here, let's see here. So, all right. All right, so now I'm going to go to, okay, CD. I'm in my root folder. So now let's see if we can use this and get there. So let's try that. Okay. All right. So I'm not sure exactly the path that it put it in. Let's see here. What was let me see here. This is one way to see. Okay, so it did it in the Scratch folder. That's why. All right, so it didn't do it. It didn't create this as a product, a full product yet. It's doing it in the Scratch folder. So that's what we got to do. Let's see here, CD Scratch. Okay. Okay, now we should be able to go and execute those commands that it wanted me to do. Oh, let's go down there. There it is. Yeah, there we go. Now it's not erroring. So it looks like it's installing all of the packages that it needs. And then after it does that, run the dev. Oh, the Windows search indexer. We all love that, don't we? Oh, I thought Visual Studio Code would be #1, but no, we got Teams above that and the Windows search indexer. But yeah, VS Code is right here. It's not using that much. It's using very little. Okay. 3 vulnerabilities. Okay. Now it did the installs. All right. Did that. Now it did the run the dev. Okay. It's ready. And now let's see here. We should be able to open up the web page. There it is. Yep. So we just created a construction website. Now the next step would be, I could tell it to deploy it to Azure deploy this to Azure, or you could deploy it to, Google or AWS, whatever environment you're working in. That could be the next step. And then I would use the DNS agent that I created that I showed you guys earlier to create the DNS. So typically what I'll do is like constructionwebsite.acidity.net. And then, you can do if you want to get your own custom domain, you can do that too. If you get one of those, you can have it configured to use your custom domain as well. But yeah, that did a whole website real quick for a business. And this was all using the free version. So, and then here's the website. So you'd have to fill that stuff in. Yep. Get a free quote. And you got to be like, oh, we need to have Calabash doing the quoting for it, right? All right. Yep. So that was going through and actually using it and actually creating a product. And that wasn't something that was dependent on the AI SDO or any of the things except for, I would say the Awesome Copilot. And Awesome Copilot was a big thing to do that. But we just saw where, it didn't do any testing. It did do some documentation, did that really good. We didn't have to do any refactoring, but it did, you can move this into a repository. So I thought it did a really great job of getting that done pretty quickly. So we went over the prompts. I was showing you some of the prompts that I've created. We use the prompt builder itself right there to actually create our own prompt for a construction website or for a business website. So yeah, and we kind of told it what we wanted, what the outcome we wanted. We wanted the prompt to be able to create a business website. We didn't really add any constraints into it or tell it that it needed to do it a certain way. We didn't really tell it exactly what the output needed to look like. A lot of times I'll let it kind of decide on its own. I focus on the outcome that I want, and I don't really give it a lot of constraints to be able to do what it wants in the prompt as I'm typing it right there. Typically what I would do is define that in a configuration file that it's referencing. And then, yep, so this query, and just give you an example of, the more detailed instructions that you give it, usually the better results that you get. So any questions on doing the construction website or building the prompt or anything so far? No? All right. And like, here's an example. You can say act as a senior Python engineer. You could develop your own Python engineer prompt if you wanted to. A lot of times if you tell it, it can kind of figure that stuff out. If you want it to be a repeatable thing, typically you create a prompt for it, and then you would reference that prompt, and then it'll do it the way the prompt is defined to do it. And these are other examples of prompt patterns that you can use. I need a fast API endpoint, accepting batch ID, calling CDS, returning that. I've found, like, with the higher level ones, you define, like, it kind of uses fast API as a default for anything you're doing, and then you don't need to tell it that. You can define that in your instructions that you have, or in your prompts, and then it'll use those things, and then it'll go out and create it the way you want. But yeah, most of the stuff with Python will use fast API typically. Yep, and you can tell it if you want to in the actual text that you're typing in, or you can define it as a repeatable pattern in some of those files that we were looking at before, prompts and the instructions. And then there's also skills, which is another thing. We were looking at that. Yep, so audit and compliance skill, deploy product skill, improve product, new product, record changes, set up secrets. And these are all different skills that you can use to do repeatable stuff in the specific way that you want it to be done for your environment. All right. And we went over the custom instructions. So, these are some of the things that are more advanced stuff that we covered. We created our own, prompt file, and then I showed you some of the skills that we have there, the reusable, testable workflows Copilot can follow. That's what we were just looking at over here. And, I'm covering a lot here. So, any of these things, there's pretty good documentation on them. You can always reach out to me if you guys have any questions about anything. I'm glad to help you with that. But they've done a pretty good job of doing documentation for a lot of these concepts that we're going over. I'm trying to focus on showing implementation of them and actual real world, implementations. We went from the stuff that I've, produced as full products, that are for sale and people can buy. And then we also did a very basic, we built our own prompt for a business website. Then we used that prompt to actually create it. And then we looked at it, your next thing would be to actually fill in the placeholders for that, deploy it, configure the DNS, and then you've got something you can show to your client or you can show to the customer. And then the agent mode and sub-agents, that's what we were looking at over here. Let me bring up one of the windows. Oh yeah, so here. So these are the different sub prompts. These all come with the awesome Copilot. That's a open repository. You can contribute to that. You can use it. They really do a great job, I think, with everything. I haven't looked at what they have recently compared to what I'm using now. I actually need to update mine. But you can see there's just a a lot of stuff. I mean, I use the critical thinking one, and it'll keep asking you questions. It's like, what are the like an employee or a coworker that always has more questions, because they're critical thinking. They're trying to think through everything, trying to think of what you didn't think. There's another one that's a blueprint mode. The blueprint mode, focuses on making sure that your design that you've designed with the planning and design is actually implemented, so it can go do a gap analysis and be like, well, this is what we designed and how it should be. This is what we built. Where's the gaps? And the blueprint can kind of go in there and figure that out. You've got bicep agents. As I mentioned, the Azure Principal Architect mode instructions are really helpful. Azure SaaS Architect mode, they're a little different. You've got Azure Terraform. A lot of, excuse me, really cool stuff that really helps you, I think, produce a lot more faster. And then what was the other stuff? We got the different models that we've got here, other models that can be used. I know I could have chosen to use GPT 4.0, GPT 5 mini. These are included, I think. I get, individual quota for each one of those. And then there's some additional settings here based on what one you're using. There's all of these other things that they can do. So you've got your prompt, and then you've got functionality that it can execute. Some of them can't edit stuff, so this prompt won't edit files in your workspace. It's not fully able to do that. It only edit files. It can't create a file. It can't do this. But depending on which one you use, they've got different things turned on and off. So let me just close that down. Now, if I look at the default agent at the top here, and I go into figure that has everything checked off. And I'll tell you guys a real cool example of an MCP server. You see, I've got this Amazon one. So you can get a add in here that allows you to connect into Amazon. And I use this actually to help me get my bill of materials and the different hardware components that I needed for the ESP32 project for the Gemstart. So I told it, I was like, here, I want to build this thing that has this functionality. And then it designed the functionality. And then I said, okay, I want you to go out and find the individual parts that I need on Amazon, add them to my shopping cart so that I can go in and buy these things. So I could buy the chips, I could here's a chip that I bought. And I've got, this stuff was all bought. If you look at the webcam, this was all stuff that I told it what I wanted, and it went out and did the shopping. I'm thinking about probably using this for the holiday times when I got to do some holiday shopping, because you can kind of tell it, go into Amazon, and what it does is it uses a thing called Cookie Cutter, and it goes and copies your cookies from your browser for your Amazon account, and then it will load them and use those cookies to impersonate you into Amazon, and then it'll you can ask it to search for stuff, say I'm looking for this, I'm looking for that. It'll actually go in and allow you to browse Amazon, and it actually add stuff to your shopping cart for you, and make that pretty cool. So that was something that I use. There's a GoDaddy one here, but each of these different tools can be configured for the different agents and what they can do. And the key thing here is for the default agent here, the agent, it does planning, it asks you questions if it needs to, it kind of encompasses everything. Like if I turn on the ask and then I go, it doesn't have as much functionality built in. So, there's different use cases for them. But I usually use the agent, and then the agent has all of these capabilities built in. You can get new ones. Let me see this Amazon setting. Yep. So this is the configuration for it, for the Amazon one. MCP server Amazon. Yep, and that's an example of an MCP server configuration that you can use. Yep. So let me go back to the presentation. So we went through, this is where most people stop and where it gets interesting. But once you start customizing it and getting more advanced with it, it can get really interesting in how it become a real force multiplier. So we looked at the GitHub Copilot instructions, the custom instructions. Let's take a look at that. Company standards, tenant subscription, naming, 31 critical rules, key vault secret only. You can, like for example, you could tell it, don't use environment variables in container apps. Instead of using environment variables, use direct key vault secret references. That's better because when you deploy a container app, you don't need to restart it in order for it to actually pull the current key vault value or the current value you need. That's a configuration value. So that's like one example of that. Let's go look at the Copilot instructions. Where is that? So here's mine. So this is my Copilot instructions file, which has been customized. And as you can see here, it says with AI SDO governance. So this file provides GitHub Copilot with context about a Sydney LLC enterprise, standards, and the AI software development organization. And this is where I've customized it. It was the last time I really changed this. I haven't, well, that was actually a while ago. Back in January, it says. But yeah, here's the default Copilot instructions. And then I believe if you do a fresh install of Copilot, you don't have any of that stuff configured, you'll get like a default Copilot instruction file. And that allows you to get started and do stuff. But this is where, like I was saying earlier, when we use the business website aid prompt that we built, I believe it was still using some of the references to like what I have in here in Copilot. So you can put in your configuration information, your GitHub org, your DevOps org, all of the stuff that are particular to your environment. So, and then you can tell it, like when you're doing this, do it this way. You can give it your governance and guidance in here. Here's my thing for extreme cost control, mandatory for all dev resources. So, I'm telling it in there. So, and I'm telling it every resource must use the absolute lowest cost configuration unless specifically authorized by me or an ARB member. And that's where if it starts to deviate from the guidance in here, you can have it create a ARB decision to change the configuration based on an architecture review board. There's also a setting that you can configure it for like bronze, silver, and gold code zones. So if you can tell it certain types of things cannot be changed, that you don't want it to be overwriting or you want it to be master configs, and then it'll specifically ask you for permission if it has to change something in there. So you got some good controls that are built in. That's a newer feature I think has come out within the past 3 or 4 months, I believe. But yeah, so we were just looking at the Copilot instructions loaded automatically into every chat. That's where you would go in and put your configuration stuff that you don't want it to keep asking you, or that you want it to use as part of everything that it does. So your Azure subscription, any of your patterns and practices, that's a good place to put that type of stuff in. Then what happens is you can actually scope your instructions. So you can tell it to only apply certain instructions to certain type of files. So an example, for ESP32 rules, they load only for INO files. The INO files are kind of like the firmware files that you use in your Arduino to compile it and put it onto the chip. But you can say, whenever we're working with an INO file, use this instruction, and that it'll basically know to pick that up. You can also say for any Python files, use these instructions for Python. Yep. So, and then these are the skills that I was just showing you that we have in there. That you can configure, and you can add other skills in there. Those are the ones that I've got so far. So audit and compliance, run a governance and compliance audit against AISDO standards, checks protected code zones, RACI compliance, documentation completeness, security baseline adherence, and DORA metrics used when reviewing a product for compliance or before a release. So this is one of the skills that I wanted to have, something that was, enforcing standards and auditing, and that this is partially what creates the, partially what creates these maturity measurements right here. So that's where this stuff comes from. you define what product readiness is, and then it can go and audit the actual product compared to what you've defined as product readiness. Then it can figure out the gap, and then you can tell it to go on there and close the gap. And of course, all of mine should be at 5 out of 5, but unfortunately they're not. But yeah, so those are the skills. That's an example of one of the skills. And then you could have skills that, that you need, for your particular environment or your requirements. Generate project documentation, README, architecture docs, API specifications, anything that you need, you can kind of tell it to do. It's been really extensible and robust. I say deploy a new product, Copilot loads the skill, runs the 40 steps, and it deploys it. So so agent mode, the game changer. Chat mode, you ask, Copilot answers. The agent mode, you state a goal, Copilot plans, edits files, runs terminal commands, checks errors, and iterates. And that's what we saw it do when it created the business website. Another example of agent is audit every product for ASR policy compliance, create work items for violations, notify me when done. That's another example of, I think it was a skill or instruction that I created. You can have one to work with your DevOps environment. If you use Jira, you could have a Jira one to work with Jira. If you use Azure DevOps, you could use one to, create work items there. If you're using GitHub, you can have it to create work items there. That's I don't know if we have time to go into that, but it's really pretty cool how when you get this configured, I've actually had it go in and create all of the DevOps work items. It creates the epics, the features, the stories, creates all of the work items, for the whole product itself. And then you can actually use that to go into your agile development process. Let's go back to the presentation here. I'm going to try to get through this, but I don't know what time is it. So we're at 7:35, so we still have 25 minutes, right? All right. Excuse me. Let me get a drink real quick. Yep. So here you go. Example of Explorer, find every place we use key vault reference instead of runtime, key vault SDK, list file line and risk level. And you can have those run and get engaged, as a subtask from one of the agents that you're running. And like it says, the net effect here is I'm not doing the work, I am directing the work. So it kind of moves you as like a software development manager, where you're, managing everything that's being done, but your employees are kind of like all of the agents and all of the tools that you have in here to be able to produce the results that you would typically, in the older model have, employees or resources or contractors to do the work. So this is a way that you can kind of, not that you don't need that anymore, but this is more of a force multiplier. So you can get, I think, more done faster and better. So you kind of can actually get the usually thing, you can either get it fast or you can get it good. Well, with this, you can actually get it fast and good if you set it up the right way. And that used to be something, there's always a trade-off, where you couldn't get it fast and get it good, and now you can. We already went over the CMDB and the product YAML. We went over the schema there. This is kind of a high-level overview of, what it's meant to do. We've got the repo path on disk, the language and framework, Azure Container App Target, Entra ID app registration and redirects, dependency health requirements, all of those configurations will go in your product YAML. And then, that's kind of like, and that is like having enterprise repository for all of your applications, like iServer or ServiceNow or whatever other thing you might be using in the enterprise. So, and then the nice thing is when you have that, already defined, it's not asking you that, it already knows that, it can, build that into its context, and then instead of it having to figure out and you repeat stuff to it, it actually defines it and then it uses it and incorporates it, so you can have progressive development as opposed to kind of like a circle of going back and having to repeat stuff. So it allows it to have a lot of context, which is very important. And yeah, here we go. So here's the MCP giving Copilot real tools. These are some of the MCP servers that I've created. I actually showed you earlier the MCP server for the SOIL report. So the soil report, gives you reports based on USGS soil composition based on their surveys. And then there's an MCP server that allows you to use Claude. Like if you're an environmental engineer and you were using AI to do your environmental reports, then you could use Claude, configure it with the MCP server stuff from the soil report app that I did, and then you could actually have it, produce those reports for you without having to go to the website. So that's an example of using the MCP server, and then you can expose whatever functionality that you want out of the MCP server that you have. So I've got the Sydney SDO one. You can query the CMDB agents lifecycle, ask it anything kind of about your configurations for the software development organization. Like Terprint MCP, that was based on cannabis batch data for down here in Florida. I think I had over 5,000 batches that are in there. And then, you buy one product and it's not always the same. You could ask it, be like, well, which batch had this, or, which batch has these terpenes or these cannabinoids, and it'll actually go in and look at the database and bring the stuff back. So it's kind of like having a chat. It enables you to have the chat, functionality from the data that your application is running on. I did a solar energy app for we have a solar energy system done by EG4 Electronics. All of their products are cloud enabled, and they have telemetry. It reports up to the cloud. And then I wrote an application that connects to that data through their API. And then I enabled it so that you could have an MCP server to kind of ask questions about your solar data. You could be like, well, how much kilowatts did I use last week? How much, have I produced, total from my solar energy panels? And you can ask it questions like that, and then it'll know to go and ask that solar MCP server those questions and give the data back. And then you can use Claude or, any other MCP client, like ChatGPT requires you to create a GPT, which is like kind of like a wrapper over, and it can use the MCP server, but it wants you to create a GPT. Claude's a little different, where you can actually go in and configure it. Yep. So I did a standard for cannabis data called Cannabis Data Exchange Standard. So there's an MCP server for that allows you to understand the schema for that data. And I was doing that so we could kind of have a homogenized data format for the data in that type of an industry. That's one where there isn't anything really like that right now, and I thought that would be helpful. The repo lens MCP, I was working on a product that would allow, and it was pretty cool because I was allowing the MCP server, and then I configured, Microsoft Copilot, not GitHub Copilot, Microsoft, to be able to query your GitHub repository. And I did that because I was developing a Microsoft Teams app, and there's a lot of specifications of how you need to do that in a certain way. And the agents that I had in like Copilot Pro, I just wasn't able to get the sophistication I needed. So I was like, well, I wonder if I use Microsoft Copilot to analyze my code, if it can help me figure out, what I need to change. So that's what the repo lens was for, to be able to, I kind of built that to be able to have the Microsoft tool analyze the code that was running in Microsoft so I could produce better stuff faster. But I was able to produce a couple different Teams apps and get them to show up in Teams. And I use the repo lens to be able to improve the code to get more done faster. Yep. So, and I mentioned earlier about the protected code zones, gold, silver, and bronze. That's something that's built into Copilot. You can configure what is gold, silver, and bronze, and then you can have protected stuff. I'll give you guys an example of when I wasn't using this, and I used a lower cost agent that was less sophisticated, or a model, and then I told it to do something, and it literally went in there and deleted and changed DNS records, and it broke all these things. And it really, like, that's where I was saying your indirect cost of using a lower cost model is sometimes higher than your direct cost of using a higher level model. The higher level model would have known not to go in and do that stuff. It would have thought about, oh, I'm going to break this if I change that. And the lower level model didn't really think about that. And it just made all these configuration changes that broke integrations. And one way to stop that is to use a higher level model. Another way to stop that is to use put those configurations in a gold, silver, or bronze area, which each has different requirements in order to be able to change them. So it'll specifically ask you, this is code that's in a gold zone, do you give me permission to be able to change that? And you'll be like, yes. And then you have like an audit trail of changing, protected configurations. The RACI, routing for every task, the RACI is responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. So you kind of have a matrix that says what role, is where in the RACI chart. And then you can have different agents or roles that are responsible stuff, or people in your organization, and have it use that to be able to control what it's doing. Yep, and you've got graduation criteria, before production promotion, so you can add that stuff in there. The governance bodies, I showed you the ARB. You can add other governance bodies if you need in there to handle certain types of controls. All of these things are actually, some of these are more advanced concepts. They're not things that you just download VS Code, you install Copilot. What you can do with that is, like, I showed you, you can create a website, a basic business website. But if you were developing an enterprise application that had all those requirements and guidance and guardrails, that's where I kind of built the AI SDO to be able to help you do that. And you could link, if you've already got policies and patterns and practices, you can link this up with those, and then have your actual AI stuff, adhering to those policies and following the guidance and governance that you have. One of the things that I've done in the past is I worked at I don't think I have it on my resume, but I was at Lockheed Martin working on the Orion space program, and I was on the software systems, processes, and tools team, and we were the team that I managed the software tools that all of the flight software, simulation software, and ground software teams use to write software. So I managed the tool list. We kind of had like an ARB where if a developer wanted to use a tool that wasn't approved, they'd submit, a request, and then we'd have a meeting, discuss it with them, and then from there, if everything passed and we did the underwriting and auditing of it, we'd be like, okay, yeah, your tool's approved, you can use it, and then we'd add it to the tool chain. So that was pretty cool. And then we used to have meetings with NASA talking about, the actual software they were buying from us. And I was on the, the team that managed the pipeline that took all of the software from all the different areas, put it into a pipeline, and then packaged it, and then actually went on to, into the Orion test labs, onto the hardware there to emulate the actual Orion, space shuttle or the space vehicle, right? So, these are some of my background that I've got in terms of, what my experience, that I was like, okay, yeah, we need this. And I was at Humana. Ed was there, I think, for a bit too, but I was in enterprise architecture at Humana. And, they have a lot of governance and controls built in there. And, I kind of took, all that stuff, which are important, and tried to bring it down and make it available to, smaller teams that may not have that same budget or that many resources. But you can, these days with AI, you can produce stuff that would have been very expensive before, kind of at a much lower cost to be able to produce stuff. Yep. So, yeah, so this is the AI software development organization. What did it ship? These are things that I've used to, ship products. I showed you all of those different products in the CMDB, the 86 products, over 200 repositories. I've used that. One of the things that I used AI for was processing the lab reports for all the cannabis batch data. I actually was using the AI, Azure AI, one of their models, and I would actually, initially what I did is I used the Copilot to kind of do a template model, and then I was extracting PDF text, and then I was figuring out where things were in it, and then that wasn't very extensible or robust. It kind of worked, but if something was in a different spot or a different area, it didn't work. And then I was like, oh, okay, well, maybe I can just use Azure AI to do that, and the document processing and the document intelligence. So then I would, send a PDF in there, and it would extract out all the text as JSON, and it was pretty much, almost 100% accurate. And then I would have all of the data in there available versus just the fields that I had defined before. So that was an iteration where I got better and was able to do that. Also, like an example of something that I developed is I use Fireflies to record my meetings. Ed has seen this. I think I've shown him some of the output from that. But Firefly is, is a tool that, records your meetings. It gives you a transcript. They have an API. So I wrote a business like analyst agent that goes and will process a meeting that I had, and then from that meeting it'll send the transcript over, and I'll usually use the Anthropic models, the Claude. I like to use the more advanced ones. It does a better job of pulling out work items, action items, decisions, discussion items, and then it'll actually go over and create those as work items in DevOps. And then from those work items in DevOps, then what you can do is have your agent go and say, okay, work on the work items that were from the meeting, and then it'll go in based on what was discussed in the meeting and actually go and produce, what you wanted to have produced or the changes to the application that you discussed. And, and I was deploying everything to container apps. Yep. And then there was another thing I built, the autonomous improvement engine based on an auto search pattern. So what was it? The 8i Daily Brief, I think it was, podcast. I was looking at that, and they talked about this pattern of a way to have your AI go in and iteratively make stuff better. And then I was able to go and implement that to be able to do that. That's a cool thing to kind of look into if you guys are interested. The auto research pattern, autonomous improvement, but that's kind of like leveraging AI to iteratively improve your product, and it goes and figures out, what's good, what's bad, and then it comes up with that gap, and then it can close it, and then you can run it again, and then it iteratively will go through and make what you have better. And that's, I think, really leveraging AI to really do AI stuff. Yeah, so we did already this, I think, live demo. Ed, I think you wanted that in the beginning. I don't know if I have time to go through all of these things, and I wanted to kind of have this be, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, we have like only about 10 minutes left, so I wanted to leave some time for people to be able to ask any questions. We can always schedule another session to continue the discussion. But if anyone has any questions while we have Jameson, now would be a good time to ask so you can answer them. Otherwise, we'll just, finish. You can just finish up your thing.
Yeah, I think we're almost done. I mean, I think I'm at the end here. We went through, what to do tomorrow, and this is it. Yeah, we're at 26 Q&A, and I'll upload this deck and provide the link to it so you guys can download it. But yeah, any questions? Yes, is it Dean, I think?
Yes. Hey, great presentation. Thank you so much. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I don't have my headset on.
Yeah, you're great.
I have a goofy question here. You know how you were showing the different sites that you had built that where users could query data using, agents and MCP servers. Do you see that as the way things are going versus, how in the past we would, as developers, write the queries, we'd create the report, blah, 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 blah. If they needed a modification to the report, we go through it. Is it becoming to where it's less money for it to hook up to an agent and have tokens and always charge basically for on-the-fly demand queries that way? Is it kind of like I need to get into the future where like nobody has CDs anymore and we all pay for streaming movies and streaming, on demand music, and nobody carries it around anymore the way that we used to? Is that,
well,
like a different way of thinking? Okay, and I'll stop talking, but that was just something.
No, that's a good question, and I think I can give you an example of the old way of doing it versus the new. Kind of an old way of doing it, and the tokens and those are used like when you're using Copilot, or you're sending out queries to a model and then it's processing it and coming back. That's different than the MCP server, where so I'm using tokens to actually have, GitHub Copilot, these agents that they're the models that I was showing you, the Claude Haiku. I'm using tokens to actually have it, solve my problems and do my work. So there is a cost to doing that. But then the other thing that we showed here, and I didn't really show an MCP server working. But an MCP server, here's an example. The way you maybe did it before is, you'd have Power BI, and then you connect Power BI into 4 or 5 different data sources. I did that at Humana, where I was connecting into ServiceNow, connecting into Orbis iServer, and I was pulling everything together. SharePoint sites, their DevOps, work items, bringing all that stuff together on a Power BI report. And the way you would consume that is actually looking at the report. So that, I would say, is kind of the old way of doing it. The new way of doing it would be, those are all of those systems expose an MCP server. Then you have an agent or a client like Claude or something that can access an MCP server. And then what you can do then instead is you could actually query ServiceNow and say, okay, how many applications do I have in our enterprise repository? And it would go and ask that, use the MCP server interface and return that back. And then if you connect, your client like Claude up to different MCP servers, then you can kind of, take stuff from one MCP server, and then you can kind of, homogenize or bring everything together, like in a chat app. And then, you can tell it, okay, do a graph of this, or, show a timeline of that data, or get the data from, iServer and then compare that to ServiceNow, do an audit and a gap analysis. I mean, that was something I had worked on before, where I was reconciling 2 databases. And the way you would do it before is you'd do a control report, and you could kind of, program it into there, a way to look for variances and differences. Maybe the way of doing it now is you have two MCP servers, and you have your client connecting to both of them, and you say, get the application list from there with these fields, get the application list from the other one with these fields, bring them together, merge them, and show me the differences. So that's a newer way of doing it. Does that make a little bit of sense of how you would implement something like that, and why you would use it, or how?
Yes, thank you so much for clarifying. And again, great presentation. I really appreciate it, and appreciate Ed for setting all these things up for us.
Good. Yeah, it's Patrick. Don't forget to go off mute.
Yeah. My agent didn't do it for me. So I wish
we gotta build that.
Yeah, seriously.
That could be a thing
already there.
Well, it could be a team functionality, because you can build stuff that listens to the conversation. You can be like, hey, Teams agent, do this, or hey, Teams agent, unmute me. I think we probably could do that. Yeah.
Am I directing my voice at the conversation or to the room? Yeah. That'd be cool. But I wish I was able to join from the very beginning, because this was great. And I really hope there's a follow-up, especially the whole workflow from, design conceptualization, working through stories and team sprints and everything. But one of the conundrums that I'm trying to solve is, if you have a big team and everybody's, if they're sister departments, you're not necessarily working on the same projects, and people are, developers are creating their own agents, very useful agents. I just consider them submodules called agents, but there's no real standardization. Have you worked through creating some sort of a modality where you're able to query what type of agents are within, I'll say, SharePoint as an example, to be able to figure out somebody else has already done that. I don't need to burn the tokens.
Yep.
I can just pull an agent that somebody else did.
Yep. And well, that's partly what I had built the AI software development organization for, so that there was a central repository of the configuration of like agents that you were using, instructions, and also the guidance and patterns and practices. So the architecture of that is that you would install that. There's a server, you have your own instance, and then there's a sync agent that allows every developer's workstation to be able to sync up to that product. So then what it'll do is it'll give everybody the same tools and the same capabilities that are defined in the organization. So if somebody did do something like that, they created it, then they would add it to the CMDB. The CMDB would have the repository, location for it, and the location, and then based on that, syncing up to the central repository, then anybody else who was syncing to that would then, get that, but they would actually be able to see that. Their instance would be able to see what somebody else had done. So that's kind of one of the ways that I solved it. There's other ways that you could do it. I think that architecture works. You don't necessarily need to use my product to do that. You could build your own, but that kind of architecture, I think, solves that problem. That was a problem that I saw. And, there's other ways to do it as well. I mean, you can have your own repository of agents and then, have a way that people, sync that down. You've kind of got a lot of different options to do that. But yeah, that is, I think, a key problem for an enterprise of being able to have the right tool set on everybody's desk to do the jobs they're doing, and also be able to share if somebody's developed something, allow other people to use it as well. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it did.
Good.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, it seems like it's something that you can work from both ends, because you're going to be running like a down selecting query tree, but from the other side, you also need some sort of a management and moderating of the upstream, what's actually available and considered a valid agent.
Yeah, exactly. So you could have somebody develop something, but yeah, you definitely want to have that governance and oversight of whoever's having the controls in place to make sure it adheres to your standards and doesn't cause any issues and actually does what it says it does. Yeah, and you'd have that, and then and then after you've passed that, like that could be architecture review board, tool review board, whatever you want to call it, and then get it published out for the enterprise to use, and then you kind of raise everybody's votes, hopefully.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions?
Ladies and gentlemen. Well, thank you very much for joining. Again, I'll share the you have Jameson's information here, and I'll also, obviously it's also on the meetup actually, so you can reach out to him in any one of these ways. Thank you all for joining. We have many more sessions coming up. We have a really good one coming up at the end of the month on the impact of AI and how jobs are changing. Moving forward, and we'll try to get more fun things like this and more fun people out here to help, to partner with you guys and everyone to help us together figure out the madness of AI and what it means for it means for this new world. So so keep faith and join and keep connecting with us, because together I think we can make sure everyone finds a space in this new world. Thank you all. Thank you, Jameson. Great job.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.